Morning, everyone. For the second part of our report, I am going to discuss to you the topic about the interactive model of listening. By the way, my name is Annalisa Gabi, and without further ado, let us now proceed. So, the first reporter discussed a while ago the listening in learning language is a vital skill in language acquisition because we produce responses and interpret or decode meanings of words from what we can hear as well. So, since teaching listening comprehension is quite a broad topic, let us discuss now first what is an interactive model of listening. So basically, from the title itself, it suggests visual representation about interaction of speaker to the listener or to the listeners. Of course, listening does not happen solely. It is always a process and the first step and process of listening that will happen is none other than the psychomotor process of receiving sound waves through our ears and submitting nerve impulses to the brain for us to decode the spoken words. So, how did this happen? So, as the fluid moves inside our ears, thousands of nerve endings are set into motion. These nerve endings transform the vibration into electrical impulses that then travel along the cranial nerve or in our auditory nerve to the brain and then the brain then interprets these signals, and this is how we hear and how we decode message. So from that interactive process, we can say that interactive process starts within ourselves as our brain acts on the impulses and bringing to bear a number of different cognitive and affective mechanisms. So there are eight processes involved in comprehension, and these were adapted from Clark and Clark in 1977 and Richards in 1983. So the following eight process occur, if not simultaneously, then in extremely rapid succession, and in neurological time must be viewed in terms of microsecond. So that fast that we cannot even think that we are decoding messages. So for our first process, we have here the hearer processes what we call the raw speech that holds an image of it in short-term memory. And then this image consists of the constituents, such as the phrase, clause, cohesive makers, intonations, and stress patterns of a stream of speech. So basically, this first process, adapted from Clark and Clark and Richards, is somehow similar to what I mentioned a while ago, the psychomotor process of hearing. And this raw speech, or the direct speech of the speaker that holds grammatical structure, will or possessed meanings will be processed in our brain. So for our next process, we have here the hearer determines the type of speech event that is being processed. So the hearer must ascertain whether this is a conversation, a speech, a radio broadcast, or etc., and then appropriately color the interpretation of the perceived message. So, meaning, this process, the second process, means the hearer or the listener will then find out whether what type of speech the speaker was talking. For our third process, the hearer infers the object of the speaker through consideration of the type of speech, the contact, the event, or the context. For example, one determines whether the speaker wishes to persuade, to request, to exchange pleasantries, and to affirm. Also, to deny, or to inform and so forth. So, thus, the information of the message at this level or this process is unfeared. So, meaning at this part, the third part, the hearer will then consider on analyzing the intention of the message and the content and the context of the speech, if it is to inform or to request. And at this part, the message will be concluded to which it was intended for. So, proceeding to our fourth process, we have here the hearer recalls background information or schemata, and then which are relevant to the particular context and subject matter. So, a lifetime of experience and knowledge are used to perform cognitive association in order to bring a plausible interpretation to the message. At this part, this process means that the hearer will try to recall background information that is important or is related to what the current speech was delivering. And also, there is an association of ideas that will form to make the
For our
information of
fifth
the message
process, we
credible,
have here the
believable, and
hearer
acceptable.
assigns a literal meaning to the utterance. This process involves a set of semantic interpretations of the surface strings that the ear has perceived. So, in many instances, literal and intended meaning match. So, for example, if one of your students walk into your office as you are madly grading papers and said or ask you question if do you have the time? So the literal meaning, do you possess enough time now to answer me, is appropriate. But then this process may take peripheral role in cases where literal meanings are irrelevant to the message. For example, you met or you happened to sit on a stranger inside a bus, and the stranger has been silent for quite a long time, and then the stranger asks you if do you have the time, and then the appropriate response, of course, is not yes or no, because it is obvious that the stranger is asking what time is it. So it's either you answer it's quarter to nine. So that's it. So, second language learners must, in such cases, learn to go beneath the surface of such language in order to interpret correctly. And therefore, process number five means that listening comprehension of the context of meaning of the sentence and meaning of the sentence varies upon the time and place the speech was delivered. So for number six, the here assigns an intended meaning. A key to human communication is the ability to match the perceived meaning with the intended meaning. Meaning to say, the match perceived in matching perceived meaning with intended meaning. Perceived meaning refers to what the listener was thinking and what the real message of the speaker was about. So, this matchmaking can extend well beyond simple metaphorical and idiomatic language. So, if your perceived meaning and your intended meaning and the intended meaning of the message are in match, uh, furthermore discussion will happen in a conversation. Then next we have number seven. So the hearer determines whether information should be retained in short-term memory or long-term memory. Short-term memory means the matter a few seconds is appropriate, like what you have in your daily conversation with your friends. If the information is not so important, then we put it in our short-term memory and we tend to forget it easily. But the long term memory is more common when you are processing information in a lecture. For example, your classmate is reporting or your professor is discussing, then long term memory is where your information that are important should be placed. So for our last process, the hero deletes the form in which the message was originally received. The words and phrases and sentences themselves are quickly forgotten or pruned. That is in 99% of speech acts. So no need to retain the short or the sort of cognitive clutter. Instead, the information is retained conceptually. So by pruned, we mean that the original speech was being cut into very important information that we will keep. Have you noticed that as well? We deleted the form of the original message, then we retain the message according to what is important for us. So, to sum up, listening comprehension is an interactive process, and after the initial reception of sound, we perform at least seven other major operations on that set of sound waves. And then, in conversational settings, immediately after the listening stage, further interaction takes place as the hearer then becomes the speaker in a response of some kind. So, all of these processes are important for us to keep in mind as we teach because they are all relevant to our learners' purpose of listening, to the performance factors that may cause difficulty in processing speech. Now, let us proceed to the types of spoken language. So much of our language teaching energy is devoted to instruction in mastering English conversation, like what we are doing right now. We reporters are the speakers and you guys are the listeners. However, numerous forms of spoken language are also important to incorporate into language course. So we have here two different types of spoken language, the monologue and the dialogue. Let us discuss first what is monologue. So, we can say that a speech is in monologue when one speaker uses spoken language for any length of time, as in speech, lectures, readings, and news broadcasts, and then the hearer comprehends. So for monologue, we have classified here two different classifications, the planned and the unplanned. So the planned, as opposed to unplanned monologues, differ considerably in their discourse structure. And planned monologues, like speeches and um, pre-written materials, usually manifest a little redundancy and are therefore relatively difficult to comprehend. When we say redundancy, meaning there's a bit of repetition of words or phrase that makes the planned monologue difficult to comprehend. For the unplanned, an example for this are the impromptu and lectures or impromptu lectures, long stories, and conversations. This uh, are defined, or this unplanned monologue is defined as the exhibit of more redundancy of words and phrase that elaborates the meaning of the speech, so which makes for the ease of comprehension, but the presence of more performance variables and other hesitations can either help or hinder the comprehension. So now let us proceed to the definition of a dialogue. So dialogue involves two or more speakers and can be subdivided into those exchanges that promotes social relationships or interpersonal and those for which the purpose is to convey propositional or factual information for transactions. So, in each case, participants may have a good deal of shared knowledge, background information, schemata, and then therefore, the familiarity of the interlocutors or these people or this two-person involved in a conversation will produce conversations with more assumptions, implications, and other meanings hidden between the lines. So, since they are familiar with each other and with the topic that they are talking or discussing about, they can create more assumptions, more connections, and they can also put meanings or can read between the lines of their conversation. On the conversation between the participants who are unfamiliar with each other, reference and meanings have to be made more explicit in order for effective comprehension to take place. Meaning to say, like in a simple, for example, in a classroom setup, so students are not familiar with the discussion, so the teacher must elaborate or explicit and then discuss thoroughly the lesson for the students to catch up the topic well. So that is what we called with the unfamiliar dialogue. So
Dialogues can
when
also
such
be
references are not explicit,
subdivided into two,
misunderstanding
where
can
the
easily
hearer is
follow.
the
So
participant and
if
which
the hearer is an
comprehension is
eavesdropper,
not
so
taken,
meaning to say when we
so
talk
there
about the
could be
participant,
a
the hearer
misunderstanding
is the
that it's
direct
possible
receiver
to
of the
happen.
speech of the sound waves, while the eavesdropper are those who intend or uh, intend to listen, but they are there are difference between these two hearer. The eavesdropper is considered to be in monologues because they are unable to interrupt and otherwise to participate vocally in the negotiation of the meaning. So it is important to take note that these categories are really not discrete, mutually exclusive domains. Rather, each of this dichotomy as usual represents a continuum of possibilities. For example, everyday social conversation can easily contain elements of transactional dialogues and vice versa. Similarly to the familiar participants may or may not particularly participate in the topic or share very little common knowledge about it. So, if each category then is viewed as an endpoint, you can aim your teaching at appropriate ranges in between. That's all. Thank you.